covered, like we're not covering that, and it's not something that you're responsible for exam number 1. So we're simply focusing on emotions and attitudes today as part of this lecture. Okay? Now, when we talk about attitudes and emotions, similar to other things that we've talked about earlier this semester surrounding perception or personality, they are quite relevant to predicting outcomes in the workplace or the way we behave in the workplace. And we're going to be understanding kind of specifically today how it is that attitudes form. Specifically, we're going to be focusing on 2 particular attitudes that are of pivotal importance to us in the workplace. And those are the attitudes of job satisfaction and organizational commitment. And we're going to be contrasting or comparing to emotions as well throughout this, and potentially see how there might be kind of some synergy or some relevance between emotions and attitudes. Okay? Now, when it comes to attitudes, they are generally certain evaluations. So they are evaluative statements that we make, or beliefs, or arguments. They are evaluative arguments that we make, and they are usually targeted towards something specific. So an object, a person, something, a group, a situation, a job. They are generally quite specific. That is a key distinction between attitudes and emotions, as we're going to see, is that attitudes are quite specific. They are quite direct in what they pertain to. Okay? And attitudes are a combination of both beliefs and values. So they really span, or they really touch on things that we think, but also things that we feel. So they have that cognitive aspect to them in the belief portion, but they also have that emotional or that feeling aspect to them, and that's where those values come in. So usually we see a combination of a belief and a value come together, and that's what forms our attitude, which ends up informing our behavior or predicting our behavior in the end. Okay? So, for example, you might have somebody observing, somebody who works, an employee who works at a certain job for a certain company, is starting to observe that he or she is spending much less time at home. They're finding that they're always spending extra hours at work. They're doing some late shifts at work. So they're observing, they're finding, or they're starting to notice that their job is taking up the majority of their day, whereas they're not spending as much time at home. Okay? So that is something that they think. That is an observation. That is something factual. By virtue of the number of hours that you're counting at work, you are finding that you are spending quite a bit of your week in the workplace. Okay? So that is that belief component. And then that same person might find that, or might state something along the lines of family life is important to them, or, leisure is important to them. Everything outside of work is something that is pivotal to them, and it is something that they value quite a bit. And anything that gets in the way of that, or anything that kind of takes away from that, is something that they do not like, or they do not approve of. So you're voicing this kind of this feeling or this sentiment surrounding your family versus your job, or your outside work life versus your work life. Okay, and when those two statements combine, or when those two, when this observation and then this feeling combine, they generate this attitude of dislike or hatred towards that person's job. Okay, and that's where that attitude, that negative attitude in this case, that's where that emerges from. It emerges from that combination of something that they observed, something that was factual, something kind of objective, but also something that is emotional, something that is sentimental, something that relates to that person's value system. Okay? Now, once that person makes that statement or kind of develops that attitude that is one that is characterized by hatred or dislike towards their job, that's where we're concerned. That's where we are starting to worry, because once you voice something like that, once you start thinking, or once that kind of gets embedded in your mind, that hatred or that dislike for your job, that's where we kind of start worrying about what intentions that will predict, or what outcomes that attitude will predict. Okay? So somebody who's kind of developing or building up that dislike or that hatred towards their job it is of our concern in the workplace, or it is of management's concern, because they are more likely to turn over. They are more likely to start looking for another job, right? They're going to be looking for a job that actually fulfills those beliefs and values that resonate or that pertain to their family, to that work-life balance that they appreciate. Okay?
Prof, there's no audio.
Can you hear me now, guys?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Okay, what was the last thing? Sorry about this. I guess the server cannot really handle this volume of people on it. That's odd. Okay, can I get a confirmation of about the last thing that you got before the connection got lost?
You should be starting emotions.
Emotions? Okay, perfect. Okay, let me just get this going again. Sorry, bear with me. Okay, we can see the slide now. Can I just get someone to say yes? Awesome, perfect. Okay, so starting again. By the way, if I minimize the slide, are you guys still seeing the fully blown up portion of it, or are you seeing the minimized one? Okay. I'll just get you guys to kind of follow on your own screen then. So just maximize it on your own screen, because if I don't minimize it on my screen, I'm not able to see if I get kicked out or if the system or if the server crashes. So just try to follow on your, on your desktop with it, and just kind of have the sound on. Okay. Hopefully we won't run into any glitches. Okay. So. Moving forward, so emotions, as opposed to attitudes, they tend to be less specific, okay? So some things that characterize emotions is that they are quite intense. So we see a higher level of activation, or we see them kind of in a more heightened way, okay? So they are things like joy, anger, boredom, okay? So they tend to be quite short-term or short-lived feelings. They are usually triggered by something, by a certain event, and they have that intensity. That is something that characterizes them, okay? And that's why when we have when we're mapping out emotions or the different types of emotions that we try to study and understand, we try to understand them from the perspective or from the function of activation, right? So you have emotions like joy or distress or fear. Those lie higher on that axis, so they are higher activation. But then you have things like boredom or fatigue when you're tired. Those are generally lower in activation. And then the other thing that concerns us when it comes to emotions is what kind of outcomes or what kind of state do they put you in? Okay, and that's where we try to understand are they likely to generate positive evaluations or negative evaluations? So we've talked about this before, in that when you're in a positive mood, you tend to see the world in a more positive light. When you're in a negative mood, you tend to see, or when you're experiencing negative emotions, you tend to see the world in more of a negative light. Okay, and that's that evaluation component that we're seeing on that bottom axis. And that, when you're experiencing emotions that are more positive, you are more likely to make positive judgments. You are more likely to see the world in a positive manner. And then when emotions that are going through you, or when the emotions you're experiencing are negative, you are more likely to see the world in a negative light. Okay, so activation in terms of high or low, and evaluation in terms of positive or negative, those are the key things, or the key functions, or the criteria on which we map emotions, or we understand how emotions come to be and how they manifest within us. Okay, so just to kind of wrap up, attitudes, again, they're evaluations, they're judgments towards something specific, whereas emotions are more along the lines of experiences. They are feelings towards something, okay? They're not as specific. Attitudes are generally things that involve that conscious or that cognitive element, remember, because of that thought, because of that belief. So it is something that we're thinking, we're observing, something objective, whereas emotions are more so non-conscious. They are fully based on sentiments and feelings. There is no cognitive, if you will, or there is no factual aspect to them necessarily. They are harder to shake off, whereas emotions are short-lived. They are things that are more brief in nature. Now, one key attitude that, as I mentioned early on, we're going to be talking about, or is of major concern to us in organizational behavior, is the attitude of job satisfaction. Okay? And job satisfaction is of key interest to us because of the different outcomes that it predicts, personal outcomes, so outcomes that pertain to you in the workplace, but also organizational outcomes. So how your personal job satisfaction could have implications on the organization as a whole. That is also something that is documented in the literature, and that is something of interest to us. Okay? And by definition, job satisfaction is a set of attitudes, or it's multiple attitudes that come together and tell us something about how people view or relate to their job. Okay, so what kind of attitude, on the basis of a variety of things or a variety of attitudes, am I developing towards my job? That is the key thing that we're interested in when we talk about job satisfaction. Okay. Now, one key characteristic of job satisfaction as an attitude, or as a collective attitude, is in the multiple facets it has. Okay? And what we mean when we say that job satisfaction is multifaceted, or that it has multiple facets, we're essentially saying that you could derive your job satisfaction from a variety of different aspects of your job. Okay? So you might derive great levels of job satisfaction, or something might be driving your overall job satisfaction, and that something might be the actual tasks that you're involved in. Okay, so the work itself, that is something that we're interested in, and that is what's driving my overall job satisfaction. Whereas somebody else, let's say your coworker, somebody who's next to you, might be more transactional, let's say, and they might be in it for the money. The money is the aspect, or is the facet, that is really appealing to them and that is driving their overall job satisfaction upwards. Okay? Other people might voice a certain positive attitude towards their supervisor or their leadership. So you often hear sometimes people say, well, the organization isn't that great, but my leader, the team leader, is actually making it or breaking it for me here. Okay? I love working with them. So those people are deriving a great level of job satisfaction from that facet, from that aspect. Okay? Others may derive it from the types of people or the coworkers that they work with. They enjoy the team that they belong to. Okay? So key things to note here: job satisfaction is derived from multiplicity of facets, so different sources, basically in layman's terms. Okay? And there are different combinations. Like, you don't have to kind of be deriving your job satisfaction just from the work itself. It could be a mix of things. Okay? So it could be from the work, it could be from the leader or supervisor, it could be from the policies, the benefits, the compensation. It could be a mix, and it could vary. Okay? Now, this multiplicity, or this variance in how people determine their job satisfaction, or in the different sources that predict their job satisfaction, okay, that's what often leads to kind of discrepancy or variance between people. So oftentimes you'll find there are two people who are sitting next to each other, working in the same environment, working in the same job, doing the same tasks, and one person is extremely satisfied with their job and the other is completely dissatisfied with their job. Okay? So that is common to see. That is not out of the norm. Okay? Different people experience the workplace differently. Their perception affects that. Their personality affects how they view their job. So it is very likely that within the same situation, everything is stable, but two different people are reporting two different levels of job satisfaction. And also another thing that we could see is two people reporting the same level of job satisfaction for completely different reasons. So again, I might be doing this job because I love the work, but you might be doing it because you love the pay. Okay? So it's absolutely possible to see this diversity or this variance between people. Okay? Generally, job satisfaction is a factor or is a construct that we're interested in, and we're interested in always boosting it because we do have evidence showing us that, you know, when employees are satisfied with their job, when they are happy in what they're doing or in the environment that they're working within, they tend to be more productive, and that's great for an organization, right? That's a positive organizational outcome, like productivity. Okay. Now, one thing to note is that even though, you know, we generally notice a positive relationship between those things, we generally notice a positive association between job satisfaction and productivity, it's not always one-to-one, or it's not always necessarily guaranteed that more job satisfaction will generate more productivity from workers, okay? We need to keep in mind that there are a variety of things, a variety of factors, so many things could be poking at this relationship or could be affecting it. Okay? Sometimes, you know, the situation itself might not be allowing. So let's say, you know, you're extremely satisfied with your job, but you have such limited control over your performance. Let's say you work at a factory, and the machines are down, let's say, right? You're not going to be as productive, but that doesn't mean that your job satisfaction is low. Okay? So your job satisfaction is high, and still you're not showing great levels of productivity on paper, and that's because of, let's say, the machines are down, but it's not necessarily because of something within your job satisfaction that is bringing it down. Okay? So a key thing that we have to note is that there's a bunch of external factors that could be impacting this relationship between satisfaction and performance. Okay? Another thing that could kind of generate some confusion or that could kind of limit that one-to-one relationship is that attitudes, you know, sometimes they may not perfectly predict performance, okay? They're not always the best predictors of performance. There might be better ones, okay? Maybe your personality is a better predictor of your performance, or your training is a better predictor of your performance. Just because you're satisfied with your job, right, it doesn't mean that you're going to be performing at a high level. Remember, you could be satisfied in your job because you love working with your coworkers. Okay? So you could totally be in this job for social reasons, but you're not the greatest worker. You're not the greatest at handling the tasks pertaining to your job. Okay? So that's why sometimes that job satisfaction may not always translate into tangible, actual performance that is relevant to the work that we do. Okay? Another thing that could also kind of cause that confusion or cause that murkiness in that relationship is, you know, when employees are satisfied, yes, we could see positive performance or better performance, but also we see the opposite, right? So when performance is high, that could also generate higher levels of satisfaction, okay? But what if that organization is not rewarding or acknowledging employees' performance? That could be stifling some job satisfaction. Okay, and that's all to say that there's so much complexity. There are so many factors at play. There are so many things that go into this relationship. So it's not fair to always assume that more job satisfaction is always going to yield or guarantee higher performance. There's much more to it. Okay, and that's the key thing that you have to keep in mind. Now, some outcomes that we see, a general framework for better understanding what outcomes emerge from job dissatisfaction. So here we're focusing on kind of the negative aspect of it. So when you're dissatisfied with your job, we have what's called that Evelyn model. It helps us map out the different outcomes that we could see. Okay? So the first potential outcome could be that of exit. right? So you leave the situation, you leave your job, you could quit, you could transfer departments, let's say perhaps, okay? So you're looking for something else, okay? So that's what falls under that exit category. Sometimes you may actually be quite vocal and proactive, right? So you're not satisfied with the situation, things are not going well, and you're going to be vocal about it. You're going to exercise your voice. You're going to go to your manager. You're going to try to change the design of your job. You're going to say, we need to work on some things here so that I can stay in this organization, okay? Then we might have the loyalty outcome or aspect, okay? And that's where you kind of succumb to things. You just wait it out, okay? Perhaps things are just, you're going through a tough time in the organization and things are going to improve. Okay, so you're just going to stay put and you're going to stay silent. And lots of people do that. Maybe they don't have alternatives. So that all they could do is just remain loyal to the company and stay. And lastly, we have the neglect aspect of it. And that's where, you're not satisfied with your job. You decide not to be proactive and not to mention that to anyone. You're just going to slowly kind of let that affect your performance. You're going to reduce the quality of your work. It's going to get worse. You may stop showing up to work as often. So that's something that is quite extreme, and we don't want to see that happen. Okay, we want to try to address it much earlier than that. Now, in terms of better understanding outcomes of job satisfaction, like the Evelyn model, for example, is directly or more specifically focused on personal outcomes. So those are things that you do as someone who's dissatisfied or sad versus satisfied, right? So you're the one who's exiting. You're the one who's exercising voice. But why do we care about job satisfaction as organizations or as managers? Like, why is it something that concerns us at that higher level beyond just the individual or the person? Okay? And that's where we have that service profit chain model that helps us understand that. Okay? And that is something that is quite specific for organizations that involve employees in customer facing or in roles where they're delivering work to somebody. Okay? Usually directly delivering that work, okay? And it doesn't have to be kind of like if you're picturing retail or customer service, it doesn't have to be only those types of jobs. That's probably what comes to mind right away. But also, let's say you're a consultant for a company, okay? You still have a client. You still have somebody that you're delivering work to. You're delivering some sort of service to them, okay? And the reason why there's all this fuss about job satisfaction in organizations is because eventually we see those personal levels of job satisfaction, okay, translate into positive emotions, okay, within the employees themselves. And that is kind of infectious. There's a contagion effect there, right? So let's say you work in customer service. If you're in a negative mood and you're abrupt with the client or with the customer, they're going to mirror that. They're going to react in the same way. They're also going to show you an abrupt attitude, and they're also going to show you a negative attitude, okay? Whereas when you're showing them positive emotions, when you're showing them a positive experience, they are likely to also experience that positivity, okay? So because of this contagion effect, that translates into things like, customer satisfaction, the likelihood of the customer coming back or them rating you higher, right? And that ultimately translates into an organizational outcome, okay? So that could be profit, that could be, customer satisfaction with the organization overall and their level of service, okay? So that's why we care quite a bit about that job satisfaction at that individual level, because it translates into positive outcomes at that higher level, okay? Through the people that you're serving, through customers, for example, okay? So keep that in mind, that's the key takeaway from there. And that job satisfaction does not only yield individual outcomes, but it also has that power and that influence to generate outcomes at a higher organizational level. Now, with that comes a bit of a controversial point or something that we always question in organizations, right? Because organizations have picked up on that, or they understood or they figured out that, when our employees are showing a positive experience and positive attitudes, that is translating into the customer's experience, and that translates into profits and good organizational outcomes for us. We have organizations now asking their employees or making it part of their role or expectations of the role to be showing those positive emotions. Okay? And that is a bit controversial because you're essentially making it part of their duties to always be happy, right? So at McDonald's, you always have to have a smile on your face as a cashier or as, in any role that you occupy there, okay? And when you're exerting that effort and it's becoming something that's a bit, it's becoming conscious, you have to think about those emotions. Remember, we talked about emotions as being a subconscious or something that just comes to be. It's something that's triggered. You don't think about it. But all of a sudden, if organizations are asking their employees to put in that effort, to plan, right? So, I'm going on my shift in 2 minutes, I have to put on that smile on my face, right? So when we have that requirement of people to start conforming to those display rules, to conform to those norms, when we're asking them to show something that we deem to be appropriate, that is what we call emotional labor, okay? So essentially, you're making the emotions that they're expressing, you're making that a task, you're making it part of their job. It is labor now. Okay? We often see that in jobs where there's a lot of customer interaction, okay? Where there's a lot of emphasis on the emotions that you display or the intensity of emotions that you display. So picture Disney here, for example, right? There's a great variety of emotions that need to be expressed by the cast. There's a great level of intensity of emotions, okay? So those are kind of some jobs that we see that experienced in frequently, okay? But again, it is a controversial point because you're asking employees to do something that is not inherent. It's not something authentic. You're forcing it in a sense. You're asking them to plan it and to control it. You're making it a conscious process when it's not actually a conscious process by virtue of the way we're built as human beings. Okay? And that's where we start experiencing that emotional dissonance, in that the emotions that we're asked to display are not aligning, or they do not run parallel to what we're truly experiencing. Okay? And that is where we're starting to kind of worry. Okay? I saw a question from Zara surrounding emotional, so it's emotional labor, Zara, it's not emotional leap. So we're talking specifically about emotional labor, when your emotions, when the emotions that we want you to display become a part of kind of labor, become part of the tasks that you have to do. Okay? An ultimate thing that they lead to and something that we worry about in organizations is that emotional dissonance. Okay? So I'm not feeling authentic anymore. I'm being asked to display. I'm being asked to act. I'm no longer portraying what I'm actually feeling. Okay? I'm being asked to be somebody else in a sense. And that is where that negativity or that controversy surrounding emotional labor comes about from. Another concept similar to emotional dissonance, but one that has more of a cognitive aspect to it, is that of cognitive dissonance. And you may have, I see a question. Lavina, if you want to either turn on your mic or just type it really quickly. Okay, while Lavina is typing her question, I'll just address cognitive dissonance really quickly. So cognitive dissonance, one thing that I wanted you to know about it, and just one thing to note, very similar process or very similar mechanism to emotional dissonance, but what's different about it is that your emotions and your thoughts. So here we're seeing we're not comparing emotion to emotion. Okay, so under emotional dissonance, we're seeing kind of forced emotion or expected emotion is not aligning with your true emotion. Okay, here what we're seeing is that your beliefs or your thoughts on something, right, they're not aligning with the emotional response. Okay, so Lavina is asking, when we talk about the pay premium for emotions, is that true emotions? So you're not necessarily seeing, you're seeing a variety of declines here. So when you're asking somebody to act in a way that is different or to portray emotions that do not align with what they're feeling, okay? So when you're asking them to put in that labor, put in that emotional labor and fake their true emotions, you're seeing a variety of declines, I would say. So you're seeing declines in their job satisfaction. That might also affect their mood and their emotions in return, right? So if I am your supervisor and I'm saying, act that way, of course that is likely to put you in a negative mood and is likely to incite negative emotions. Okay, but I would say it's also likely to generate a variety of other declines or negative outcomes, right? Job satisfaction being one of them. Okay, the pros. Now, the reason why that concept came about, or why it's something that we talk about, is because again, organizations are leveraging that piece of evidence that when your employees are experiencing positive emotions, then that translates into a positive experience for the client, and that's what they're going off of. But it's more so what they're missing out on is that you cannot generate that positive experience by simply forcing your employees to show that smile or to slap a smile on their face. So what we often see, like at McDonald's, for example, asking or forcing your employees all the time to slap a smile on their face, that's not sustainable. That's not how we go about it. But when you're compensating your employees fairly, when you're establishing a great organizational culture to work in, those are things that are likely to generate true and authentic positive emotions, right? When I'm your supervisor, let's say at Starbucks, and I am showing you great respect on your shift, and I'm offering you a workplace that is fun to work in and that is very cohesive, that is ultimately going to lead to positive emotions. Right? Versus when I force them, when I make them an expectation, when I make them part of the job, when I make it laborful, okay? That's when we're concerned with it. So it's more so that businesses are going about it the wrong way. They just kind of found this piece of evidence, they barely understood it and how it works, and they just ran away with it. Okay? And that's the mistake, is the mechanism, or it's the way they applied it. Okay, now more on emotions. You may have heard of this term before, emotional intelligence. And it's kind of capitalizing on or, pushing forward that idea or that perspective that just like we have, our cognitive ability or our general intelligence that helps us process information, having that ability to process emotions is also something that is pivotal for us in the workplace and as human beings, because we are social beings and we're always interacting with others. So emotional intelligence taps into your ability to recognize your own emotions and your ability to regulate your own emotions, but also your ability to recognize and regulate others' emotions. Okay? So am I able to pick up on what you're feeling? Am I able to help you kind of understand what you're feeling? Am I able to understand what you're feeling? And then am I able to do something with it? Okay? Or am I completely oblivious to that? Am I only concerned with myself and how I'm feeling? And I completely disregard everybody else? Okay? So emotional intelligence, and what we're seeing in the emotional intelligence model is that, the two key processes are recognizing and regulating emotions, right? So we want to understand, recognize, pick up on emotions and understand them, and then we want to be able to do something with them, okay? So if I'm recognizing that I'm going through positive emotions right now, and I want to translate that into a positive customer experience, that's how I want to manage it. That's how I want to actually trigger it or leverage it, okay? So that's only one aspect of it because it's something pertaining to myself. But it's also about how you deal with others' emotions. So recognizing and regulating emotions in others. Okay? So again, this is something pivotal for customer service types of roles or in customer-facing situations. Okay? Not only should you be concerned with your own emotions, but you should always be reading your customer and what they're voicing and how they're feeling. Okay? And then how do you manage their emotions and how do you understand that process? Okay? So that's the key idea behind emotional intelligence, and those are the two key processes. Okay? So we have recognition and regulation. Those are two key processes, but also be aware that it doesn't only apply to yourself, but also how do you do that or how do you apply these processes to others that you're engaging with. Okay? Those are some key things to note in the emotional intelligence model. Now, some higher, we have this emotional intelligence hierarchy. So essentially, we're trying to understand kind of, what are some things as part of emotional intelligence that make you have a higher level of emotional intelligence. By the way, we call it EQ, so emotional intelligence could be, you could hear somebody calling it EQ. So the things that boost your EQ or that help you generate a higher EQ are the aspects that pertain to others. So when you're able to recognize and regulate emotions in others, that's when you've peaked. That's when you have a high level of EQ. If you're somebody who's only able to recognize and regulate their own emotions, you're probably on the lower end of the spectrum, right? Or let's say you're only able to recognize your own emotions, but you don't really have a good grasp surrounding them, or you don't really know what to do with them and how to leverage them, right? That is definitely going to put you at a disadvantage. You're much lower on that EQ hierarchy, okay? So we want to be able to deal with ourselves and our own emotions, but also with others, because we are social beings and we are always interacting with others in social settings. Some things that emerge from a high level of emotional intelligence, or some things, to give us a better idea as to why we value that in the workplace, why we always kind of seek people with higher levels of emotional intelligence. They are good predictors of your leadership abilities or effectiveness, okay? They will predict, how good you are as a team member, as a colleague, okay? They predict, are you able to come to good decisions? Are you able to engage in more balanced decision making or cognitive processing? Okay, so those are some of the things that we see. Even emotional labor, it is positively related to emotional labor. So because when you have that good understanding of emotions in you and in others, you are better able to understand, sometimes if your job requires abiding by certain display rules, you are more geared or more adept at it. Okay. In terms of developing that EQ, some people might have that innate within them. They have a certain level of it innate within them. But we also see a lot of ways to go about boosting it through coaching, training people, kind of reflecting and helping them practice that skill of, picking up on others' feelings and regulating feelings and emotions in them and others. And also it is definitely something that kind of develops or comes with age. So as your perspective grows, as you engage with others, as you go through more outcomes and consequences in life, your EQ becomes more robust. It gets built up some more. Okay. Now, moving towards wrapping up this lecture or this chapter, the last attitude that you're responsible for knowing, and that is another key attitude that is of key importance to us in the workplace, is that of organizational commitment. Okay, so apart from job satisfaction, we have organizational commitment, which is another pivotal attitude that we need to understand in organizations. Okay. And that attitude, or that attitude of organizational commitment, is one that taps into, how strongly do you have a link or bond between yourself and the organization? Okay, so we're really seeing how much you bond with your organization and how you identify with it. Okay, is there a strong association between the two of you? Okay, that's the main thing that we're concerned with here. An organizational commitment, similar to job satisfaction, it has different facets or different sources from which it could emerge. Okay? And organizational commitment specifically has three sources or three different types in which we could see it in or reflected in. The first type is that of affective commitment. Okay? Now, from the name of it, affective, okay, so we have affect, so that means it relates to emotions, it relates to feelings here, right? Affective commitment is a type of commitment that emerges or from having that true liking and associate your job. Okay, so you truly love the work that you do. You identify with it at a great level. It brings you joy. So that's why we're seeing that affect component. It's called affective because you have that love towards your job. You actually derive meaning and you actually love being at your job every day. Okay? So you are deriving affective commitment simply from the tasks that you're engaged in, from the meaningful workplace from the meaningful work that you deliver. Perhaps you're serving communities in your job. Okay? So you truly have that love for your job. Okay, it's quite a pure and authentic attitude towards your job. Okay. Whereas we have another type, which is continuance commitment. And continuance commitment is a type of commitment, or, you stick with your job or you stick with your organization, essentially, is what we're saying, because you could not afford to leave. Okay? You have to stay. You kind of are forced to stay. And a major factor that is forcing you to stay is kind of something that is financial or transactional. So maybe else. So this is the only salary that you could rely on. This is the only place you could actually get a salary from. So you are less likely to leave that job. So you're going to commit to it. Okay? So it's not necessarily the most positive type of commitment. Yes, you are staying at that job, but really the only thing that's keeping you is the fact that you don't have any alternatives. You don't really have anywhere that you could turn to. Okay? You're quite stuck in this job. So let's say you're someone who did not upgrade their skill set over the years, right? You started working back in the 50s or the 60s, let's say, and then computers came about, and you did not pick up any sort of computer skills, right? You are much more stuck than somebody who has kept up with the times and somebody who has always upgraded their skill set. Okay? So that is a form of continuous commitment, or that is something that helps us understand how we could drive continuous commitment. Now, don't always think of it in a negative way, right? Let's say you're a stellar employee, you're somebody who's great, and you show great levels of affective commitment, okay? But then all of a sudden you get an offer from a competitor to join them, and they're offering you a greater salary, okay? What your employer might do is they might boost your salary above what you're being offered to try to keep you there on the basis of finances. Okay, so it's absolutely possible to see someone with high levels of affective commitment, but also, we do need to fulfill our needs as human beings. So we do like money. We do want more money. So employers may also try to kind of get you to stay longer or get you to boost your commitment through some financial aspects. Okay, so we shouldn't just completely disregard continuance commitment or think of it always in a negative way. Okay? Sometimes it's a good tool, it's a good additional thing to have. But ultimately, we don't want somebody in our organization staying simply for the money. That's where it becomes bad. Okay? When you're simply there for the paycheck, because you don't have any other alternatives, that's when we're concerned with it. And lastly, we have normative commitment. And that's where we see somebody staying in an organization because they think that they should. They think it's the right thing to do. Okay? So they feel societal norms, perhaps. So you might see that to be quite high in certain cultures. So let's say in Japan versus Canada, right? The Japanese have much more loyalty to their employers. They tend to stay because their employer gave them a job. They gave them an opportunity. They feel that if they leave, they're kind of betraying them. Right? So they feel they have that duty that they need to fulfill that obligation. They need to reciprocate by staying. Okay? But that's not to say that we can't see it in other forms in Canada, let's say. So for example, you hear of people kind of being sponsored by their organizations to go do an MBA, right? MBAs are very expensive. So as your employer, as an organization, I might say, I value you as an employee. I think you're a stellar performer and you could be the future leadership of the organization. So I want to invest in you. Okay? I'm going to send you to a university to do your MBA. Okay? You could argue that this initiative or this strategy could be continuance, right? It could have some continuance commitment associated with it because you're kind of, there's a financial element. You're paying for somebody to go do an MBA, a very expensive degree. But also the employee might see this as, wow, my employer cares about me. They invested in my education. They invested in my personal and professional development. So I feel I should stay with them and give them back the fruit, the outcomes of this MBA. Okay? So that could be something where we see normative commitment emerging from. Okay? So it's feelings of duty, feelings of obligation. Or let's say you work in a non-profit. The money isn't great in a non-profit, but you're serving populations. You're doing something that is very meaningful. Okay? So that is where you might see perhaps some affective, let's say, but you might also see some normative because you feel like you have a duty, okay? The job of a nurse is very daunting, it's very stressful, but you're helping save lives, okay? So you feel you have an obligation, you have a duty there, okay? Now, some things that help us predict or boost the different types of commitment. When it comes to affective commitment, really the best predictor out there, like no, you can't doubt it, is truly the content of the work that you're doing. Okay, so when you're engaged in meaningful work, in satisfying work that challenges you and engages you, that's the biggest predictor, or that's the best thing for affective commitment, right? Continuance commitment, that's where it's kind of based on things like finances. So that's quite a transactional one. So here again, you might boost somebody's salary, you might improve some benefits. Okay, so that's something that could generate some higher levels of continuance commitment. Ultimately, it's kind of that feeling you're building, or you're capitalizing on that feeling of, I cannot afford to leave, or if I leave, I'm missing out on something. And that something is usually transactional or financial. And then when we have normative commitment, okay, so that is usually, you're working on offering benefits and offering an environment that makes employees feel that sense of duty and obligation, okay? So again, I might offer you some benefits or an investment in your future, like an MBA, or give you mentorship from the CEO of the company, okay? Or sometimes it could be within the socialization that we have in the organization. So when you have organizations, or when you have employees who truly kind of take on that identity of their organization, okay, they become one. They identify as one with their organization. So take somewhere like Lululemon, right? Like that is an organization where you feel like it's kind of a cult even. There's a certain culture to it. There's a certain type of environment that you walk into as an employee, okay? So that could be kind of how there's that element of socialization, and that you start feeling that sense of duty and obligation towards the cause or towards the mission of your organization. Some consequences or some outcomes that we should be aware of. Affective commitment, as you might expect, it's positively linked to job performance, so that is something that we always want to see. We want to encourage as much affective commitment as possible. So that's why we're always talking about, offering people challenging and meaningful work. Continuance commitment, as we mentioned earlier, that's the one where we worry about. If you're only on your job or in your job for financial reasons, that's where we're concerned. That is going to bring your performance down. You're only there for a paycheck, but you don't care about the quality of work that you're delivering. Okay? Again, all those three types of commitment, they essentially mean that, you're sticking to the firm, you're staying with the organization. Okay? But more so what we want to understand is what is driving that staying in the organization. Is it something like loving your job, and that's great, we want that? Or is it something like, I can't afford to leave my job, but I'm actually a terrible performer? Okay? And that's something that we don't want in the organization. Okay? Again, as we already mentioned or alluded to earlier, you really want to see high levels of affective commitment with continuance. You don't want to see somebody just showing high levels of continuance commitment but low affective. Okay? That again signals that I'm only in it for the pay, but I don't love what I do. That is not sustainable for the employee or the organization. Okay? We want to avoid that. And lastly, some things that we should note, and that even though we talk about organizational commitment as something that we always want to boost and something that we want to foster in organizations, we should always keep in mind the downsides or the negatives of high levels of organizational commitment. Okay? So everything in moderation is great. Okay? When you have somebody exhibiting very, very high levels of organizational commitment, okay, that could cause some concern surrounding work-life balance. Okay, so if they're so committed to their job that they're spending so many hours in it and they're not, spending as much time at home, that concerns me. Are they becoming more stressed out? Are they not establishing or striking that good balance between their work and family life? Okay. Another key negative implication that high levels of organizational commitment could have is unethical conduct or illegal behavior. So sometimes employees develop that great bond with their job and that great liking for their job to the extent where they feel, if they notice something off, something suspicious is going on, like let's say they notice that the accounting department is fudging the numbers, they stay shush on it because they don't want anything bad affecting the organization, okay? Because they are so committed to that organization that they're not willing to let anything, any scandal get in the way of that, okay? So we often see unethical conduct emerge because of that. Okay? And then lastly, one key negative implication that we could see is that when you're so committed to a certain culture or a certain organizational style of doing things, sometimes that, gets you stuck in your ways and you are no longer able to see different perspectives, or you're no longer able to innovate in the organization. You become more resistant to new ideas and new perspectives. Okay? Because you're so committed to this one way, to this one type of situation, to this one organizational culture and the way they do things, that you're no longer able to see or wanting to see things in a different light. Okay? So that is our lecture for today, and that is the final thing you're responsible for next week's midterm. Or exam 1, sorry. Thank you for bearing with me today with our glitch, and I hope this medium actually did the lecture justice and it did not kind of interfere with your understanding of the topic. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to try to book us a room maybe later this week or most likely early next week, where you could come in, where you could drop in to ask me questions to prep for the midterm, because that was supposed to be something we were going to do once we were wrapping up chapter 4 today. But since that is not possible today, I think what I'll do is maybe either Monday or Tuesday, I'll book a classroom and I'll give you guys the opportunity to come by and ask any questions you may have. I'll send out an announcement pertaining to kind of details regarding the midterm, the exam 1 for next week, so expect that soon. And obviously you could email me with any questions that you have. If, for example, let's say that drop-in Q&A session is at a time that does not work out for you, we could figure out kind of a time to meet on campus or to address your questions via email, okay? I think what I'll do now is I'll give you a chance to kind of open up your mics if you have any kind of major questions that you want to ask or any major clarifications. But if you're done, then feel free to go, and yeah. So I'll stick around for a bit, and then if you guys have questions, go ahead. You can either ask them via chat or just by opening up your mic. I could not hear that very coherently, so you might want to type that.
Oh, okay. So just a clarification about the voice. Is it clear or do you want to type it?
Still cannot hear that. Sorry.
Sure, just one second. So I typed it here. I think they got lost into there.
Zara, I don't know if anybody if we can't hear you. If anybody could hear her and want to type the message, or if you want to type the question, go ahead.
I typed that as well.
Oh, sorry. Okay, your question is about so the Evelyn model, and when you're dissatisfied with your job, specifically pertaining to the voice component. So voice your concern so you can do something about it, make it better, leave, so we do it so you can do something about it. Yes, so essentially under the voice outcome or the voice strategy is you're going to do things to make your job or your situation better. So you could generate higher levels of job satisfaction. Okay, so you're doing it, by kind of going to your boss and saying, this and this is not working out for me, my work schedule is not working out for me, we need to improve it so that I could establish a better work-life balance, let's say. Okay, so that is that voice component. Okay. Okay, so I have Jessica asking, does the midterm cover lectures 1 to 4? Yes, it covers everything up until what we did today. That is true. Ahmed, for job satisfaction. Okay, so Ahmed, regarding your question surrounding job satisfaction being, or attitudes, specifically attitudes being poor predictors of specific behaviors, again, this is emphasizing that point that, you may be satisfied with your job. Again, satisfaction is derived from a variety of reasons. Okay? So you may be showing a positive job satisfaction attitude. Okay? But you may simply be satisfied because you love working with your coworkers. Loving, working with your coworkers doesn't necessarily mean that you're a stellar performer. You might just be coming to work for socializing, but you're not actually doing the work. So that is an example of when we see kind of attitudes. They're kind of things that tell us something, but sometimes there's a certain level of ambiguity, or they are susceptible to a variety of influences. Okay, so that's why sometimes they are not the best predictors. Okay, so when it comes to job performance, it might be arguable that your personality is a better predictor, or your previous work experience is a better predictor. Okay, you might even see some people show negative levels of job satisfaction, right? But still, they are so diligent that they deliver great levels of performance. Okay, so that is another example of how attitudes may not always be the best predictors of behaviors or outcomes. Okay, and essentially the key point here is that there's a variety of factors at play. Okay, there are so many things going on that we need to know more information about them before we're able to make a call on something. Okay, especially with job satisfaction, because it has multiple facets, that masks so many things. Okay, so that's the key thing, Ahmed. In terms of questions surrounding format and number of questions, I'm going to hold off on that for now. The main reason being that with the class cancellation and closure today, I'm not sure what other sections ended up doing. Like, I know I'm doing this online, but I don't know what other instructors have decided to do today. So I don't know if I'm going to be getting an email from them saying, should we kind of reconsider something? So let's just wait for my announcement. For now, the general structure is that, yes, it's going to be multiple choice, that's for sure. And the original plan was that it's going to be 70 questions. But again, wait for a very final confirmation just in case this closure affected the different sections differently. But for now, yes, you're definitely getting a multiple choice exam is what I could tell you. The number of questions, I'll release that in an announcement. No short answer, just multiple choice questions. It's going to be a mix of kind of some things that are more along the lines of definitions, and then it's going to be other things that are more along the lines of situations and you being able to interpret them based on theory. So yeah, keep that in mind. Zara's question, in the emotion circle chart, activation, intensity, or the level of our activity based on... No, Zara, it's intensity. It's not activity as in, how much we move. It's intensity, kind of. So, when you're bored, you're in a mellower state. When you're tired, you're in a mellower state, so the activation is lower. But when you're excited, when you're afraid, right, your whole system is kind of working there. So you're activated at a higher level. You're much more intense. Okay? So it's not really activity, in the generic form of activity. Shannon's question, how is emotional labor of forcing employees to falsify positive emotions enforced? Shannon, that's oftentimes, as simple as managers kind of going around and saying, put a smile on your face. Like that is something that actually happens in retail settings. So that's when we see it being enforced in a very upfront and basic way. It's as simple as that. You have managers kind of simply telling their employees to slap a smile on their face. Hamad, your question surrounding the downsides of commitment and specifically work-life balance. So if you're highly committed to your job, you love your job so much that you're prioritizing it over everything. Okay, it could involve spending way more time at work than you need to. Okay, it's going to encroach on your family life. You're gonna be spending less time taking care of yourself and your family because you're valuing or you're prioritizing your job much more. Okay, so that's the link to work-life family balance. In terms of illegal behavior, again, you're prioritizing your organization so much that you're not willing to have anything harm it. Okay, so let's say the organization is going through tough financial times, and you don't want the shareholders to see that. You might be more likely to commit financial fraud or ethical misconduct. You are more likely to fudge the numbers on your financial statements so that the outside world does not see that your organization is going through something negative. Okay, so you're really kind of acting as a savior for the organization in that sense, regardless of what it takes. Okay, and that's where sometimes it could be illegal or unethical. Elliot, the course outline is on D2L. Okay, I believe that's the end of questions. Anything else, guys? Yeah, Lavina, I'll post all of that in the announcement. It's just there's nobody on campus right now to even book the room for us. So just give me until tomorrow afternoon and or Friday morning, and I'll see which room we get booked. But it'll most likely be either Monday or Tuesday of next week.